Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight, we step into a tale where silence itself hides a secret. The final note at dusk is more than a melody. It is a mystery etched in shadows, a story of betrayal, obsession, and the last haunting echo of a tune played just once. As the sun dips below the horizon, Hercule Poirot finds himself drawn into a puzzle that begins with a single, unfinished note and ends with a revelation no one could foresee. Stay with us until the very end, because in this mystery, every word, every silence, and every heartbeat holds the truth. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales, your doorway to stories where suspense never sleeps. Chapter 1: A Whisper at Twilight. The last rays of daylight clung stubbornly to the windows of Lady Winthrop's country house, spreading long golden streaks across the polished parquet floor of the drawing room. Outside, the gardens were already wrapped in the faint haze of evening, where shadows stretched like silent spectators across the lawns. Within, however, the air was restless, the kind of tension that lingers when polite society attempts to mask discomfort beneath civility. The drawing room itself was splendid. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows, and the grand piano, black, glossy, and dominating the far end of the room, sat like a silent sentinel. A crystal decanter of brandy caught the last threads of light, throwing fractured patterns across the rug. The house, though elegant, was far from joyous. It was here, only an hour before dusk, that the body of Edwin Delamere, renowned pianist, composer, and guest of Lady Winthrop, had been found. He was slumped over the grand piano, his head resting awkwardly upon the keys. When discovered, the impact of his fall had pressed down a cluster of notes, a discordant chord still echoing faintly when the first horrified scream rang out. That scream belonged to Clara Winthrop, the hostess herself. Tall, severe, yet striking, she had entered the room with a tray of letters meant for the evening post, only to stumble upon the terrible sight. Edwin Delamere motionless, his fingers splayed like a puppet's upon the keys, a glass of untouched port beside him, and a sheet of unfinished music spread across the piano stand. It was said that Delamere had been working on a new composition, a haunting nocturne that, according to his words, would be his last and greatest work. Now, that promise lay as silent as the dusk settling outside. Into this atmosphere stepped Hercule Poirot. Poirot had been invited to the Winthrop estate quite by chance, or so it seemed. He had been in the countryside for a brief rest, taking in the clean air and indulging in the pleasures of well-prepared meals, when Lady Winthrop extended her invitation. She had boasted of an intimate recital, a gathering where her friend, the illustrious Edwin Delamere, would perform. A night of beauty, she had promised. Yet, as the Belgian detective entered the drawing room now, summoned by the panicked footman, beauty was the last thing to be found. Captain Hastings was with him, his brow furrowed with concern. He stood just behind Poirot, glancing at the still figure across the room. "My word, Poirot," Hastings muttered under his breath. "Looks like the poor fellow had a heart attack while playing. What a ghastly thing, dying in the middle of music." Poirot did not answer at once. His sharp eyes darted across the room, taking in every detail: the sheet music, the glass of port, the crumpled cuff of Delamere's sleeve. His gaze lingered upon the man's face, peaceful, almost serene, but with a faint shadow across his lips. Poirot bent closer, his polished shoes making no sound on the rug. "You see, mon ami," he murmured softly, though without his usual flourish of French. "Things are not always as they appear. Regardez, look closely." Hastings crouched, following Poirot's gesture. At first he saw nothing unusual. The piano keys bore the impression of Delamere's final collapse, and the scattered sheets of music seemed ordinary enough. But Poirot pointed to the man's glass, the untouched port. He poured himself a drink, Poirot said quietly. Yet he did not take a sip. Why? Hastings shrugged uneasily. Perhaps he never got the chance. Or, Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing, perhaps he knew better than to drink. The household had gathered by then, summoned by the commotion. Lady Winthrop herself, pale and trembling, clasped her lace shawl tightly around her shoulders. Behind her came her niece, Isabel, a young woman of 23, with dark, watchful eyes and an air of suppressed emotion. Then came Dr. Jonathan Marbury, the village physician, stout and red-faced, who had been staying at the estate for the weekend. There was also Mr. Charles Avery, a fellow composer and longtime rival of Delamere, his sharp profile outlined against the fading light. And lastly, the butler, Graves, a man of impeccable manner, though his lips pressed tightly together as if he held secrets between them. All five stood now in the drawing-room, their voices hushed, their glances shifting nervously toward the body. It must have been his heart, Lady Winthrop whispered, her voice shaking. He had been under so much strain, so much passion in his work. Surely, it overwhelmed him. Dr. Marbury cleared his throat. Indeed, Lady Winthrop, from the position of the body, I would say heart failure is the likeliest cause. These musicians, they often drive themselves to exhaustion. But Poirot raised a hand. His small figure was almost comical against the grandeur of the piano, but his presence commanded silence. "Non, madam," he said, his voice deliberate. "This is no natural death." The room fell still. Even Hastings looked startled. "What do you mean, Poirot?" Hastings asked quickly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "There are marks, small but telltale. At the corner of his lips, you see it? A faint stain. It is not from wine. It is from something far more deadly." A shiver passed through the gathering. Isabel, the niece, gasped softly, clutching at her pendant. Mr. Avery scowled, though his eyes betrayed unease. Poirot straightened. "Ladies and gentlemen, I fear we are not witnesses to a tragedy of nature. We are witnesses to murder." The declaration sent ripples of shock across the room. Lady Winthrop collapsed into a chair, her hand pressed against her temple. "Murder? Here? In my home? Steady on," Hastings said, stepping forward. "Let's not alarm ourselves unnecessarily. Poirot, old chap, surely you can't be certain already." "But I am," Poirot replied firmly. "Consider, Delamere was about to play his new composition, yes? A piece he believed would be his last, his most magnificent. A man in such a state does not crumble in silence. And note, his glass of port untouched, his pen lying askew, and, most telling of all, this sheet of music." He held up the paper that had lain across the stand. Upon it were the opening bars of a nocturne, delicate and haunting. Yet near the bottom of the page, a sharp blot of ink marred the staves, as though the composer's hand had faltered abruptly. "A man of such precision does not leave his work thus," Poirot murmured, "unless his hand was forced." The guests exchanged glances. Mr. Avery gave a short laugh. "My dear Poirot, surely you are reading too much into this. Edwin Delamere was a genius, yes, but he was also fragile. We all knew he suffered from nerves. Perhaps the strain was too much. You cannot turn every death into a puzzle for your amusement." Poirot turned sharply. "Monsieur Avery, it is not amusement. It is truth. And the truth, it seems, is not agreeable to all." A silence followed. Outside, the last glow of daylight faded entirely, and the room grew darker. Graves moved to light the lamps, the flames casting long, wavering shadows across the carpet. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work. He surveyed the group before him. Lady Winthrop, desperate to protect the dignity of her house. Isabel, silent and tense, her eyes darting between Avery and the body. Dr. Marbury, his insistence on natural causes, perhaps too quick, too convenient. Avery himself, whose rivalry with Delamere was well known in artistic circles. And the butler, Graves, silent and watchful, standing too still. Yes, here were the players in the drama. And somewhere among them lay the hand that had written not music, but death. Poirot spoke softly, almost to himself. At dusk, the music ceased. But there was one more note. N'est-ce pas? The note of silence. And silence, Mies Amos, can sometimes scream louder than sound. Lady Winthrop shivered. Poirot, you mean the killer could still be among us? In this very room? Poirot inclined his head gravely. Yes, madam. That is precisely what I mean. The lamps flickered. Outside, the twilight deepened into night, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Poirot placed the sheet of music back upon the stand, smoothing it gently with his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but resolute. This was no accident, no collapse of nature. This was the deliberate ending of a man's life, at the very hour he sought to give life to his final melody. And I, Hercule Poirot, will discover who silenced him and why. The words lingered in the room, heavy as the dusk that had now fully fallen. And so, the investigation began. Chapter 2. The Melody Lingers. The house of Lady Winthrop did not rest easily that night. By the time the village constable had been summoned, darkness had fully descended, swallowing the gardens in a veil of damp mist. Inside, the guests spoke in hushed tones, their voices carrying with them the nervous cadence of people bound together by tragedy and by suspicion. The grand piano stood untouched, its lid gleaming dully under lamplight, the sheet of music still resting where Poirot had smoothed it. It seemed almost indecent to remove it, as though the very air clung to Delamere's unfinished melody. Poirot and Hastings had taken temporary possession of the drawing-room, insisting that no one move the body until further examination could be made. Hastings sat stiffly in an armchair, casting uneasy glances at the figure slumped over the keys. Poirot, however, remained standing, his arms folded, his eyes narrowed as he walked slowly about the room in a circular pattern. He paused first at the glass of port. The liquid caught the lamplight, a dark ruby surface that trembled slightly when Poirot shifted the tray. He brought the glass to his nose, inhaled delicately, then set it down. There is bitterness, he said softly, more to himself than to Hastings. Bitterness not belonging to wine. You mean poison? Hastings asked, lowering his voice instinctively. Poirot inclined his head. It is probable, but we must confirm. And until then, we must not speak too freely before the household. Already, suspicion will gnaw at them, like rats in the dark. Hastings shuddered. Beastly thought, but who could have wanted to kill him? The man was a musician, not a soldier or a politician. What enemies could he have? Poirot turned sharply, his eyes gleaming. Ah, mon ami, you underestimate the passions of art. In music, there is rivalry, envy, pride, all the dangerous emotions that feed murder. A rival composer, a jealous lover, a patron who fears exposure. Do not dismiss the stage simply because it plays with notes instead of swords. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Lady Winthrop. She entered quietly, her face pale, a silk wrap gathered around her shoulders. She moved like a woman who had aged 10 years in the span of one evening. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, the others are asking questions. They wonder if they may retire. It is unnerving sitting together in such tension. Poirot bowed his head gently. It is natural, madam, but I must ask, who among your guests was closest to Monsieur Delamere? Whose company did he seek most often? Lady Winthrop hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the wrap. He was friendly with my niece, Isabel. Too friendly, some might say. She admired him greatly, and he, in turn, seemed captivated by her youth, her admiration. But it was harmless, I assure you. Poirot's eyebrows rose, though he said nothing. And then, of course, there was Mr. Avery, she continued, her voice tight. They had known one another for years. Both composers, both proud. But pride can twist the heart, can it not? Poirot nodded gravely. It can indeed. And what of Dr. Marbury? He seemed most insistent that death came naturally. Lady Winthrop gave a faint smile. Jonathan? He is a dear friend of the family. He attended Edwin often. Delamere was prone to fainting fits, you see. The doctor always said it was nerves. And yet, Poirot murmured, tonight he insists again, too quickly. Curious, is it not? Lady Winthrop faltered. You do not believe? Poirot raised a hand. I believe nothing yet, madam. I observe. I think. And then I know. Later, when the house had settled into uneasy silence, Poirot requested that the guests meet with him one by one. They gathered reluctantly in the library, a room lined with dark mahogany shelves and filled with the faint scent of tobacco. A fire crackled softly, though it brought little warmth to the atmosphere. First to be summoned was Isabel. She entered with a nervous grace, her dark hair framing her face, her eyes darting between Poirot and Hastings as though searching for judgment. Miss Winthrop, Poirot began, his tone gentle. You were fond of Monsieur Delamere, were you not? A flush crept in her cheeks. Everyone admired him. He was brilliant, magnetic. His music, she broke off, her voice catching. Yes, I admired him. More than admired, perhaps. Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. Isabel stiffened. If you are implying anything improper, Monsieur Poirot, you are mistaken. He was kind to me, yes. He said I had an ear for melody. But that was all. Poirot tapped his finger lightly on the arm of his chair. And yet, admiration can become dangerous, can it not? Did you know of his last composition, the Nocturne? She hesitated. He mentioned it. He said it would be his final work. I thought he was being dramatic, but I never saw the score. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Miss Winthrop, you were the last to speak with him before he sat at the piano. What words passed between you? Her eyes widened. How did you know that? Poirot smiled faintly. I see the small details. You lingered near the door before entering with the others. Your perfume. It was near him, not by accident. So what did he say? Isabel clasped her hands tightly. He said, listen at dusk, and you will hear me. That was all. Her words hung in the air, strange and ominous. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully before allowing her to leave. Next came Mr. Charles Avery, the rival composer. He strode in briskly, his posture rigid, his expression defensive. You want to know if I killed him? Don't you? He said bluntly. That's why I'm here. Poirot spread his hands. You anticipate me, monsieur. Why such readiness to defend yourself? Avery scowled. Because everyone knows we disliked each other. Edwin was vain, self-absorbed, always proclaiming his next masterpiece would outshine the rest of us. And yes, I despised him for it. But murder? I don't lower myself to that. Poirot tilted his head. And yet, envy is a powerful motivator. Tell me, where were you at the hour of dusk? In the smoking room, Avery snapped. With Dr. Marbury. He can confirm it. Ah, an alibi, then Poirot murmured. Convenient. But let us not forget, even an alibi can be rehearsed like a score. Avery's eyes flashed, but he said nothing more. Dr. Marbury was summoned next. He shuffled in, looking weary, his face ruddy from brandy. I suppose you think I failed him, he said at once, sinking into a chair. But I did what I could for the man. His heart was weak. Anyone could see it. Perhaps, Poirot said quietly. And yet, doctor, you prescribed him rest and calm. Was it not curious, then, that he pushed himself harder in these last weeks? Did you not warn him? The doctor waved a hand. I told him yes. But geniuses never listen. He was obsessed with this nocturne, said it had to be finished before the year was out. He refused to heed me. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Doctor, did you handle his medicines personally? A pause. I sometimes gave him tonics. Harmless things. Nothing more. Poirot leaned back, watching him carefully. You are nervous, Dr. Marbury. Too nervous. A physician is calm in the face of death, yet tonight you tremble. The doctor looked away, muttering something about grief. Poirot let him go. At last came Graves, the butler. Tall, gaunt, his manner precise to the point of severity, he entered with his hands clasped behind his back. You wish to see me, sir? Poirot studied him. Oui. Tell me, who poured the glass of port for Monsieur Delamere? I did, sir. At his request. He asked for it to be placed beside the piano before his performance. And you saw him drink it? No, sir. When I returned, he had not touched it. Then Lady Winthrop entered, and his voice faltered briefly. She found him, as you see now. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you noticed nothing unusual? No strangers? No movements in the house. Graves hesitative. His composure cracked just for a second. No strangers, sir. But I did hear something. A low sound like humming. It came from a music room, just before Lady Winthrop entered. At first I thought it was Delamere. But now, he trailed off, his lips pressed tightly shut. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. That will be all. When the interviews concluded, Hastings leaned toward Poirot as they returned to the drawing room. Well, what do you make of it, Poirot? They all seem to have their secrets. But who could have slipped poison into the glass? Graves brought it. Avery had motive. Isabel was near him, and the doctor had access to his medicines. It could be any of them. Poirot touched a finger to his lips. Patience, mon ami. Each's motive, yes. But only one had the opportunity. An opportunity, like a note in music, must be struck at precisely the right moment. Consider the humming Graves heard. Consider the unfinished score. There lies our clue. Hastings frowned. You mean the music itself is a clue? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, the music always tells the truth, even when men lie. He glanced toward the piano once more, his gaze lingering on the ink-blotted page. The melody lingers, he whispered, and in its lingering, it whispers of death. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted mournfully, and the house, wrapped in unease, waited for dawn. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Score. The dawn brought no comfort to the house of Lady Winthrop. A thin veil of mist clung stubbornly to the lawns, softening the outlines of the hedges and statues, but inside the atmosphere was brittle, like the brittle snap of a string pulled too tightly. Servants moved in hushed tones, their eyes wide with unease, while the guests, each cloaked in their own secrets, avoided one another in the breakfast room. The scent of coffee and buttered toast could not mask the tension that hung over every conversation. Hercule Poirot, however, appeared as composed as ever. He arrived at the table with his usual neatness, his mustaches immaculately arranged, his shoes gleaming as though they alone defied the gloom that had fallen upon the household. Captain Hastings followed, rubbing sleep from his eyes and muttering about the draft in the corridors. Mon cher Hastings, Poirot said, settling into his chair, you English have a proverb, do you not? Morning brings clarity. He spread butter delicately across his toast. Eh bien, I find it true. In the light of day, the shadows are fewer, and yet some shadows remain. Hastings frowned. If you ask me, Poirot, the whole business is straightforward. Delamere's death was poison, yes? Then we need only determine who slipped it into the glass. That butler fellow, Graves, had the opportunity. Poirot sipped his coffee. Perhaps. But opportunity alone is never enough, mon ami. Motive, method, opportunity. All three must meet in harmony, like the notes of a chord. Remove one, and the music falters. Lady Winthrop entered just then, accompanied by her niece Isabel. Both women bore the strain of a sleepless night. Lady Winthrop's composure was forced, her voice brittle as porcelain. "I have written to the authorities in London," she announced. "They will send an inspector. In the meantime, Monsieur Poirot, I beg you to continue your inquiries. I cannot endure the thought that Edwin's death should remain unexplained." Poirot inclined his head. "Rest assured, madam, I will not cease until I have uncovered the truth. But I must ask, where is the manuscript? The complete score of Monsieur Delamere's final nocturne?" Isabel's eyes flicked up in surprise. "You mean the sheet music? It is still on the stand, is it not?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, only the first page remains. The rest gone." The revelation caused a murmur at the table. Avery, who had entered silently and was stirring his tea with unnecessary force, gave a sharp laugh. "Of course it's gone. Do you not see? He guarded that score like treasure. If he left it unfinished, someone must have taken the rest, perhaps to destroy it, or perhaps to claim it as their own." Isabel gasped. "You can't mean—" But Poirot held up a hand. "No accusations, not yet. But we must ask ourselves, why steal a man's music at the very moment of his death? Unless the music itself speaks of something the killer wished to hide." Later that morning, Poirot returned to the drawing room. The pale sunlight fell across the piano, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. He stood before the instrument, gazing at the single page of music left upon the stand. The notes, inked with precision, carried a haunting theme. But near the end of the page, before the ink blot where Delamere's hand had faltered, Poirot noticed something strange. The rhythm shifted abruptly, as though a new theme intruded, jagged, dissonant. It was unlike Delamere's usual style. Poirot tapped the page thoughtfully. Curious. He begins with harmony, then dissonance intrudes. It is as if he wrote not music, but a message. He seated himself at the piano and pressed the keys softly. The chords rose into the air, melancholy, uncertain. Hastings, who lingered uneasily in the doorway, winced at the discord. "Sounds beastly, if you ask me," he said. Poirot ignored him. He played the sequence again, then stopped abruptly. His eyes narrowed. "It is not merely discord, Hastings. It is deliberate. Each note, each interval they spell something. But what?" Their musings were interrupted by Graves, who entered quietly, his expression grave. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "there is something perhaps I should tell you. Last evening, before the recital, I overheard a quarrel. It was between Mr. Avery and Mr. Delamere. They were in the music room. The words were sharp. I did not catch them all, but I heard Mr. Avery say, 'If you dare play it, I will see you ruined.'" Hastings sprang up. "There you are, Poirot. That clinches it. Avery must have killed him." But Poirot shook his head. "Non, Hastings. We must not leap so quickly. Yes, Avery had anger, perhaps even hatred. But hatred does not always lead to murder. And there are others with secrets yet untold." Poirot requested another round of interviews. This time, he pressed each guest further. To Isabel, he said, "Mademoiselle, you admired Delamere. Did he confide in you? Did he speak of enemies?" She hesitated. "Only once. He said his music was dangerous. I thought he was being dramatic. But he told me, if I finish it, someone will silence me. I thought he meant critics. But now," her voice faltered. Poirot studied her carefully. "Dangerous music. Fascinating." To Dr. Marbury, Poirot asked, "Tell me, doctor, did Delamere take any specific medication? A tonic, perhaps?" Marbury frowned. "Yes. I gave him a powder to ease his nerves. He dissolved it in water. But it was harmless, merely valerian. Are you certain, doctor? Could anyone have tampered with it? The doctor hesitated. I kept it in my bag. But of course, others could have touched it. Poirot's eyes glittered. Just so. And to Avery, Poirot said, Monsieur, your rivalry with Delamere is well known. But was it merely rivalry, or something deeper? Avery sneered. He stole from me. Years ago, he took a melody I had written, disguised it, and made it his own. Everyone praised his genius. I knew the truth, but I could not prove it. So yes, I despised him. But murder? No. I would sooner outshine him with my own work. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Then perhaps you would covet his last score? To prove him false. Avery flushed, but did not answer. That evening, as dusk crept once more across the gardens, Poirot gathered the household again in the drawing room. The lamps burned low, their glow uncertain. My friends, Poirot began, yesterday at this hour, Monsieur Delamere sat here at the piano. He prepared to play his last composition, but instead, he played his last breath. Someone silenced him. Someone stole the rest of his music. And that, I think, is the key. He turned to the piano, gesturing toward the page. Listen, the notes are strange, are they not? Discord where there should be harmony. But music, like language, can hide a message. I believe Delamere left us a clue, even as he died. The unfinished bar, the blot of ink, it was his signal. Lady Winthrop clasped her hands together. You mean, he tried to name his killer? Perhaps, Poirot said softly. But the melody alone is not enough. We must look deeper into the shadows behind the score. There lies the truth. The household shifted uneasily. In their eyes, Poirot saw fear. Fear of discovery. Fear of guilt. He let the silence stretch, then added quietly, Tomorrow, I shall have the proof I need. And then, Miss Amos, the silence will break. Outside, the last light of day vanished, and the house settled into uneasy slumber. But Poirot remained wakeful, his mind turning over the notes of the unfinished melody, the bitter glass of port, the missing score. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and as the night deepened, so too did the shadows of the score. Chapter 4. The Silence After. The following evening, the house of Lady Winthrop seemed to hold its breath. The drawing room, with its velvet curtains drawn tight against the dusk, was lit only by the glow of tall lamps and the faint gleam of the fire. The piano stood at the center like an altar, the single surviving sheet of Delamere's Nocturne waiting upon its stand. Around it, the guests gathered, each one uneasy, each one with their secrets pressing down upon them like the weight of the night. Lady Winthrop sat stiffly, her pale hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Isabel watched Poirot with anxious eyes. Avery leaned against the mantelpiece, feigning indifference but betraying it with a nervous drumming of his fingers. Dr. Marbury kept to the shadows, his eyes darting, his lips pressed tight. Even Graves, the butler, hovered near the doorway, as if uncertain whether he stood as a servant or a witness. Poirot took his place at the piano. His small, precise figure looked almost fragile beneath the lamp's glow, but his eyes glittered with certainty. Captain Hastings lingered at his side, shifting impatiently, eager for Poirot's revelation. Poirot cleared his throat. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. My friends, last night I told you I would have a proof, and tonight I do. But let us begin not with the poison, nor with the glass, nor even with the rivalries that burned in this household. Let us begin here. He touched the sheet of music. This, the fragment of Monsieur Delamere's final composition. You see only notes upon a page. But listen, and you shall hear what he wished us to hear. Poirot played. The notes rose, somber and heavy. The melody, mournful at first, slipped into sudden dissonance, a clash of intervals that grated on the ear. He paused, and the silence after the discord was sharper than the sound itself. "Eh bien," Poirot said softly. "You hear it, do you not? But you do not yet see. Allow me to explain." He pointed at the notations with his finger. "Look, these notes, they form not only music but letters." He arranged them deliberately. D, E, D. A gasp rippled through the room. "Yes, dead." That much he told us with the music itself. But there is more. The unfinished bar, here, and the blot of ink. It is not clumsiness. It is deliberate. It points, not to the sound of music, but to silence. Poirot's mustaches twitched. And silence, yes, Amos, is the province of one man only. His gaze swept the room and settled, at last, upon Dr. Marbury. The physician stiffened. "What nonsense is this?" "Not nonsense, doctor. Precision. Monsieur Delamere suffered nerves, yes, and you prescribed a powder, valerian, you say, but in truth, what you gave him was not harmless. Someone exchanged it for something else. Something deadly slipped into his evening glass of port." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "You, doctor, had both the knowledge and the access, and you thought none would suspect. But you forgot the vanity of the great musician, his need to leave a final mark. He named you in the only language left to him." Marbury's face drained of color. "This is absurd. I had no reason to harm him." "No reason." Poirot raised his brows. "On the contrary, you had the strongest reason of all. Years ago, Monsieur Delamere ruined your reputation, did he not? You were accused of malpractice, but it was his testimony, his letter to the board, that sealed your fate. You despised him for it, though you concealed your hatred beneath the guise of friendship. You bided your time, doctor, and when at last the moment came, you struck, with poison in the port, and with the manuscript torn away to hide the clue he left behind." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Avery barked a laugh. "So, it wasn't me after all." Poirot turned a cool gaze on him. "You, monsieur, are not without guilt. You threatened him. You coveted his genius, perhaps even stole from him. But murder? Non, that was not your role in this little symphony of death." Marbury, his composure shattered, rose unsteadily to his feet. His hands trembled. "It was justice," he cried. "He destroyed me. Do you think I would let him sit in glory while I lived in disgrace? He deserved it, every drop." Lady Winthrop gave a strangled sob. Isabel shrank back in horror. Graves moved quickly to bar the door, but Marbury sagged against the wall, the fight gone from him. Poirot rose from the piano and smoothed his cuffs. "It is finished. Justice will not come by your hand, doctor, but by the law. You wish for silence, but silence does not last. The truth, like music, finds its voice again." The police came before midnight, summoned discreetly by Lady Winthrop. Dr. Marbury was led away, his face ashen, his mutterings incoherent. The household dispersed slowly, each to their rooms, weighed down by the shadow of what had been revealed. At last, only Poirot and Hastings remained in the drawing room. The fire had burned low, the last embers glowing faintly in the grate. Hastings, shaken but still restless, broke the silence. "Dash it all, Poirot, how on earth did you see it? I thought the whole thing was simply ghastly music." Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, I listened, not only with the ears, but with the little gray cells. Music is order, pattern, meaning. So too is crime. When one is broken, the other speaks. Monsieur Delamere left us his testament, not in words, but in notes. And in the silence after, we heard the truth." Hastings shook his head. "Well, you've done it again. But I'll never hear a piano the same way in my life." Poirot chuckled softly, his eyes on the piano. "Nor should you, Hastings. For sometimes in the quietest moments the loudest secrets are told." And as the clock struck midnight, the house settled once more into silence. Not the silence of fear, nor of murder, but the silence after, the silence of truth revealed. And so, the mystery of the final note at dusk reaches its end, with Hercule Poirot once again unraveling a crime concealed in shadows and music. What did you think of this tale? Did you suspect the doctor before the final reveal? Or were you following another thread of suspicion? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and join me again for more journeys into the world of Hercule Poirot, where every silence hides a secret, and every secret awaits its revelation.